At my retirement party, my nephew mocked, 40 years and you're still nobody. Everyone laughed. Then the CEO took the microphone and said, actually, he's been on our board of directors for 20 years, under a different name. The cheap supermarket sheet cake sat sweating in the center of the break room table, the frosting weeping under the harsh fluorescent lights of the third-floor conference room. It was 4:15 p.m. on a Friday in late October, and the air smelled of stale coffee and forced celebration. This was my retirement party. After 42 years of employment at Sterling Holloway Logistics, the company deemed me worthy of a $24 cake, a lukewarm pitcher of iced tea, and a 20-minute break from the grind before the weekend shift cleaned up the mess. I stood near the recycling bins, holding a paper plate that was rapidly losing its structural integrity, watching the room. There were maybe 15 people there, mostly from the records department, people who knew me as Arthur, the quiet guy in the cardigan who managed the physical archives in the basement. They were good people, mostly. But then there was the sales team, who had drifted in looking for free food, and at the center of them was Julian. Julian was 27 years old, wore suits that were too tight and too shiny, and possessed the kind of unearned confidence that usually results in a catastrophic lifestyle crash by age 30. He was also my nephew, my sister's son. He had been working at Sterling Holloway for 3 years, a position I had quietly secured for him when he flunked out of his second attempt at a communications degree, though he didn't know I was the one who pulled the strings. To Julian, I was just Uncle Artie, the family failure who pushed paper for a living while he, the senior account associate, was a master of the universe. Julian tapped a plastic fork against a glass mug he had brought from his own desk, the sharp clink, clink, clink cutting through the low murmur of conversation. He grinned, his teeth whitened to an unnatural shade of porcelain. All right, listen up everyone, he boomed, projecting his voice as if he were addressing a shareholder meeting rather than a break room gathering. The room quieted down, more out of awkwardness than respect. Julian walked over to me and draped a heavy, patronizing arm around my shoulders. I flinched, but I didn't move. We're here to say goodbye to Artie, Julian announced, looking around the room with a smirk. 42 years. Can you imagine? 42 years in the basement, filing papers, moving boxes, dodging dust bunnies. A few of the sales guys chuckled. My colleagues from the archives looked down at their shoes. Julian squeezed my shoulder, his grip performative and condescending. And you know what the funniest part is? He continued, leaning in as if sharing a conspiracy. 40 years, Uncle Artie, and you're still nobody. I mean, look at this. A sheet cake and a handshake. That's the legacy, huh? No office, no title, just a badge turnover. The humiliation hit me in the chest, hot and suffocating. It wasn't the insult itself. I had been called worse things by better men. It was the public nature of it, the way he invited strangers to laugh at his own blood. But hey, Julian added, raising his mug, at least you won't be in the way of the real work anymore. Enjoy the recliner, old man. The room was silent. Even the sales guys stopped laughing, sensing that the line between roasting and cruelty had been crossed. Julian stood there, beaming, waiting for applause that wasn't coming. And then, the double doors at the back of the room swung open. It wasn't a casual entrance. It was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Sterling Holloway, a man who rarely descended from the 34th floor. He was followed by 2 members of the legal counsel and the chief financial officer. The room froze. Julian's smirk faltered. Marcus walked straight to the table, picked up the microphone from the portable karaoke machine someone had set up, and looked directly at Julian. Is that what you think, Julian? Marcus asked, his voice calm, deep, and terrifyingly level. You think Arthur is a nobody? Julian stammered, his confidence evaporating. Mr. Thorne, it's just a joke, a send-off. Marcus didn't blink. Actually, Marcus said, and his voice carried a weight that made the fluorescent lights seem to dim. He hasn't just been filing papers. Arthur has been on our board of directors for 20 years, under a different name. In fact, he owns the building we are standing in. To understand why I was standing in a break room, letting a 27-year-old narcissist insult me, you have to understand the history of Sterling Holloway, and more importantly, the history of my family. I met Marcus Thorne in 1982. We were both 23, broke and hungry, operating out of a rusted storage container in New Jersey, trying to figure out how to optimize shipping routes for textile manufacturers. Marcus was the face charismatic, tall, the kind of man who could sell sand in the desert. I was the brain. I was the one who wrote the algorithms on yellow legal pads, the one who understood that logistics wasn't about moving things, it was about information. We incorporated in 1984. Marcus took the CEO title because he loved the spotlight. I took the title of head of internal records because I hated it. I suffered from a debilitating stutter in my youth that left me with a lifelong aversion to public speaking and crowded rooms. We structured the company with a dual-class share system. Marcus held 40% of the voting stock. I held 40%. The remaining 20 was floated when we went public in 1998. But on paper, to the outside world, my shares were held by a blind trust, the AP Holdings Group. I legally changed my name on the corporate charter to a pseudonym, staying on as a lowly employee because I loved the work. I loved the puzzle of it. And frankly, I wanted to see how the company actually ran from the ground level without the filter of middle management sucking up to me. For 40 years, I lived a double life. By day, I was Artie from the basement, making $45,000 a year. By night, I was a decamillionaire who reviewed board packets and approved mergers from my home office. This This arrangement worked perfectly until my sister, Linda, demanded I help her son. Julian was a problem from birth. Indulged, spoiled, and dangerously arrogant, he grew up believing the world owed him a living. When he washed out of college, Linda called me, weeping, asking if I could put in a good word with the hiring manager at the warehouse. I did more than that. I called HR and had them create a junior sales role, thinking that perhaps hard work would straighten him out. I was naive. The survivor archetype often makes the mistake of projecting their own work ethic onto the narcissist. I thought he needed an opportunity. What he wanted was an audience. For 3 years, I watched from the shadows as Julian bullied secretaries, stole credit for collaborative projects, and expensed personal vacations to the company card. He treated me, his poor uncle, with a mix of pity and disdain, never knowing that the signature he was forging on his expense reports was eventually reviewed by the man he mocked at Thanksgiving dinner. He called me a loser to his friends. He told the family I was holding him back because I wouldn't lend him money for a sports car. I took it all, because I was gathering data. I wasn't just his uncle. I was the primary shareholder, and I was conducting a 3-year audit of his character. The discovery phase of my investigation into Julian wasn't difficult, but it was voluminous. Because I worked in internal records, I had administrative access to every digital footprint created within the company network. Julian was sloppy. Narcissists usually are. They believe they are smarter than the systems that govern them. It started with small things. In February 2023, he expensed a dinner at Le Bernardin for $800, listing the attendees as client Apex Industries. I pulled the calendar logs. The Apex representative was in London that week. I cross-referenced the receipt timestamp with Julian's social media. He had posted an Instagram story from the table, tagged with 3 of his fraternity brothers. Fraud count 1. I didn't flag it. I printed it and put it in a file marked Project Nephew. By late 2023, the behavior had escalated. Julian was now diverting leads. He would take incoming calls meant for the senior account executives, route them to his personal cell, and then claim the commission. He was stealing food from other people's plates. But the real crime, the one that would eventually seal his fate, was the kickback scheme. In early 2024, Sterling Holloway began looking for a new vendor for our fleet maintenance. It was a contract worth $4 million annually. Julian, despite being a junior associate, pushed hard for a company called Vanguard Mechanics. He sent aggressive emails to the procurement officer, claiming Vanguard was industry standard. I looked into Vanguard. It was an LLC registered 6 weeks prior in Delaware. The registered agent was a lawyer, but the beneficial owner, hidden behind 2 shell companies, was a man named distinctively Trevor H. Vance. I knew Trevor. He was Julian's roommate from his failed college days. I dug deeper. I accessed the internal vendor setup forms. Julian had bypassed the compliance check by using the login credentials of a supervisor who was on maternity leave. He approved Vanguard himself. Once the contract was signed, Vanguard began overbilling us by 40% on every oil change and tire rotation. And every month, 2 days after Vanguard got paid, a deposit of exactly 15% of the invoice total would hit an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. How did I know? Because as a board member, I had authorized a forensic sweep of all vendor relations under the guise of a yearly audit. The forensic accountants traced the IP address used to access the offshore account. It was the IP address of Julian's company-issued laptop. He was embezzling corporate funds to buy a leased Porsche and designer watches, all while sneering at me for driving a 2014 Honda Civic. I had him. I had the bank transfers, the forged approvals, the IP logs, and the geotagged photos of him on a boat that Vanguard paid for. I took the entire file, 400 pages of undeniable proof, to Marcus's private residence 3 days before the retirement party. We sat in his library, drinking scotch that cost more than Julian's annual salary. Marcus read the file in silence. When he finished, he closed the folder and looked at me. "He's going to prison, Artie," Marcus said softly. "You know that, right? If we execute on this, it's federal wire fraud." I looked at my old friend. I thought about the way Julian spoke to the receptionist. I thought about the way he mocked me at Christmas. I thought about the nobody comment I knew was coming. "I know," I said. "Let him have his speech first." The silence in the break room following Marcus's revelation was absolute. It was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed, a sound that suddenly seemed deafeningly loud. Julian's face had gone from a flushed red to a pasty, sickly white. He looked at Marcus, then at me, then back at Marcus, his brain unable to reconcile the two realities. "Board of directors?" Julian whispered, his voice cracking. That's impossible. He works in the basement. He files papers." Marcus didn't look at Julian. He looked at me. "Arthur," Marcus said, deferring to me for the first time in public in 4 decades, "would you like to address the floor?" I stepped away from the recycling bins. I put down the paper plate with the untouched cake. I adjusted my cardigan. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the stutter waiting in my throat. I felt cold. I felt precise. I walked to the center of the room, standing next to the CEO. I looked at the colleagues I had worked with for years. Sarah from accounting, Mike from the mailroom. They were staring at me with wide, bewildered eyes. Then I turned to Julian. "I chose to work in the basement, Julian," I said, my voice steady, unamplified, but carrying to every corner of the room, "because I built this company to be a machine that functions on precision, not ego. I wanted to ensure the gears turned smoothly without the friction friction of arrogance. I reached into the inside pocket of my cardigan and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. You called me a nobody. You said I left no legacy. I unfolded the paper. It was a termination notice, drafted by legal, pending my signature. My legacy is that I have protected this company from parasites for 40 years. Parasites who mistake proximity to power for power itself. Julian stepped back, bumping into the table. Uncle Artie, come on, he pleaded, a desperate, wet smile trying to form on his face. It was a roast. We're family. You can't be serious. I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No anger, no pity. Just the clinical detachment of a surgeon removing a tumor. We are not family here, I said. Here, you are employee ID 90214, and I am the chairman of the audit committee. I turned to the two security guards who had quietly entered the room behind the legal team. Please escort Mr. Vance to his desk to collect his personal effects. His company electronics are to remain. He is to be removed from the building immediately. Julian looked around for support, but the sales guys, his boys, were looking at the floor, terrified of making eye contact with the secret owner of the company. You can't do this, Julian shrieked as the guards took his arms. My mother will kill you. I'll sue. Marcus stepped forward then. You won't be suing anyone, son. The legal team has a packet for you regarding the Vanguard account. I suggest you save your money for a criminal defense attorney. As they dragged him out, he didn't look like a master of the universe. He looked like a child who had been told no for the first time in his life. The aftermath was a lesson in the brutality of procedural justice. Julian was fired for cause, which meant no severance, no continuation of benefits, and an immediate freeze on his unvested stock options. But that was just the employment side. The criminal side was far worse. Sterling Holloway filed a formal complaint with the FBI regarding the embezzlement and wire fraud. Because the amount exceeded $200,000 and involved crossing state lines with the shell company, the federal prosecutor took the case. My sister, Linda, called me 47 times in the first 24 hours. She left voicemails, screaming that I was a monster, that I had ruined her baby's life, that family sticks together. I listened to one, then I blocked her number. I didn't block her because I was angry. I blocked her because I was done acting as the shock absorber for their dysfunction. The legal process took 18 months. Julian, stripped of his job and facing jail time, turned on his friend, Trevor, immediately, cutting a plea deal that reduced his sentence, but still left him with a felony record and a restitution order of $350,000 he will be paying me back in small, garnished increments for the rest of his life. As for me, I didn't go back to the basement. I didn't stay on as chairman either. I officially retired, for real this time. I cashed out 20% of my holdings, a sum that solidified my financial independence for generations, and I bought a small vineyard in the Loire Valley of France. It's quiet there. I spend my days cataloging vintage wines, a different kind of archiving. I have a new name there too, just a simple one. The locals know me as the American who pays his bills on time and tips well. Sometimes I sit on my porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the vines, and I think about that sheet cake. I think about the moment the room went silent, and I realize that the greatest luxury wealth provides isn't the cars or the houses or the trips to Cabo. It is the ability to stand in a room full of noise, knowing you hold the silence in your pocket and choosing exactly when to let it out. I wasn't a nobody. I was the architect, and when the building finally needed cleaning, I was the one who took out the trash.